Kill me or marry me.
The woman appeared at the edge of his property during a dust storm, moving with a kind of purpose that suggested desperation had overridden caution. Samuel Cross was 61 years old, had lived alone on his ranch in the mountains of New Mexico for 35 years, and had learned to recognize when someone was at the absolute end of their choices. The woman was Apache, perhaps 40, with the bearing of someone who'd once held authority before circumstances had stripped it away. She was thin, not from hunger necessarily, but from the kind of weight loss that came from carrying unbearable burdens. She approached his porch directly, no hesitation, no fear. "My name is Yiska," she said without preamble. "I am a widow. My husband died 5 years ago. I have no family, no tribe that will claim me, no money, no prospects. I have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I've been surviving on the margins, taking work no one else wants, sleeping where I can, eating what I can find." Samuel listened without interrupting, recognizing that she had something important to say and needed to be allowed to say it. "3 days ago," Yiska continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words, "a man in town made me an offer. He said that for $5, I could be his wife, legally, officially bound by law. He would provide shelter, food, clothing. In exchange, I would be his property. He could do whatever he wanted to me, whenever he wanted. No refusal, no protection, just complete ownership." Samuel's hands clenched into fists. "I came here," Yiska said, looking directly at him, "because I heard you were a man who valued honor. I came here to make you an offer. Marry me legally, give me your name, give me protection by law, or kill me, because I will not, become that man's property. Those are my only choices. Either you give me a life worth living, or you give me the mercy of death. I'm asking you to choose one." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing what she was asking, understanding the absolute desperation that had driven her to these two extremes. "Come inside," he said finally. "We'll talk about this properly." Inside the cabin, Samuel prepared food and coffee while Yiska sat at his table, watching it with a kind of exhaustion that came from surviving on nothing but will. When he set the food before her, she ate slowly, carefully, as if her body had forgotten how to process nourishment. "Why me?" Samuel asked. "Why would you come to a stranger and ask for something this significant?" "Because you have a reputation for being honest," Yiska said. "Because I heard that you turn away a woman once rather than take advantage of her vulnerability. Because I believe you're the only man in this territory who might actually honor a commitment to treat me as a partner rather than property." Samuel sat across from her, and his expression was thoughtful, measuring. "I need to be clear about something," he said. "I'm not going to marry you out of pity or obligation. If we do this, it will be because we both believe it's the right choice. That means I need to know who you really are, not just what circumstances have forced you to become." For the next 6 hours, Yiska told him her story. She had been born into a family of Apache leaders. Her father had been a respected warrior, her mother a healer. Yiska had been educated, trained in the ways of her people, expected to carry forward her family's legacy. But when soldiers had come and destroyed her village, killing her parents and most of her family, Yiska had survived by becoming invisible. She'd hidden and she'd lived, but the cost of that survival had been everything she'd been. She'd married a traitor who'd promised to help her rebuild. Instead, he'd isolated her, controlled her, beaten her. When he died 5 years ago, she thought she was finally free. But the frontier offered no real freedom to Apache widows. The reservations wouldn't take her because she'd married outside the tribe. The towns treated her as less than human. The only options available to her were degradation or death. "Until I heard about you," Yiska said, "I heard that you were different, that you treated people with respect, that you lived by a code that didn't involve exploitation. And I thought, maybe there's one place where I could exist with dignity. Maybe there's one person who would let me be myself without requiring ownership in exchange." Samuel made his decision that night, sitting by the fire while Yiska slept in his bed, and he sat in the chair by the hearth. He wouldn't marry her because she demanded it. He would marry her because, After listening to her story, he understood that Yiska was one of the strongest people he'd ever known. She'd survived betrayal, loss, and systemic dehumanization. She'd made a choice between two impossible options and had the courage to approach a stranger and ask for one of them. That took a kind of strength that most people would never understand. But he also wouldn't marry her immediately. First, he needed to give her something else. Time, space, the opportunity to understand that she had choices beyond the two she'd come with. In the morning, Samuel told her his plan. "I'm going to offer you something different than what you asked for," he said. "I'm going to give you a home here, legally registered in your name. I'm going to teach you to manage property, to handle finances, to build independence. You'll work with me on the ranch, and you'll be paid a fair wage. You'll have your own space, your own autonomy, your own choices. And when you've been here long enough to understand that you have real options, when you've had time to heal and to remember who you are beyond survival, then we can discuss marriage, not as an escape from something worse, but as a choice you're making from a place of strength." Yiska stared at him, and tears began streaming down her face. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing." "Because you deserve it," Samuel said simply. "Because your life has value, and you deserve to live on your own terms. And because I believe that when people are given real choice, they often choose connection. But that choice has to be real. It can't be born from desperation." For 6 months, Yiska lived in a small house on Samuel's property, learning to be independent. Samuel taught her about managing cattle, about ranch finances, about the legal protections available to property owners. But more importantly, he listened to her. He listened to her stories about her family, about her culture, about the woman she'd been before grief and trauma had nearly consumed her. He helped her remember the strength that had always been inside her, the intelligence and capability that circumstances had tried to bury. Yiska began to change. The haunted quality in her eyes slowly shifted to something more alive. She started to laugh again, real laughter, not the hollow sound of someone performing happiness. She spent hours reading in Samuel's library, discovering philosophy and history, and stories that reconnected her to the intellectual traditions of her people. And slowly, almost without realizing it was happening, she fell in love with Samuel, not because he'd saved her, but because he respected her. He didn't try to own her. He didn't diminish her. He simply stood beside her while she rebuilt herself, and he believed in her capacity to do it. On the 7th month, Yiska asked to speak with Samuel. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of crimson and gold, and Yiska said something that had been forming in her heart for weeks. "I want to marry you," she said, "not because I'm desperate, not because I have no other choice, but because I choose you, because I've learned that you're a man of honor, that you value women as people rather than possessions, that you've given me something no one else has ever given me, genuine respect. I want to build a life with you, not as an escape from something worse, but as a choice towards something better." Samuel pulled her close, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I've been waiting for this," he said, "waiting for you to understand that you were always worth everything, that you didn't need to be desperate to deserve love and partnership, that you are brilliant and strong and capable of choosing your own path." They were married in a small ceremony at the ranch, with the nearest preacher traveling 3 days to perform the ceremony. Yiska wore a dress she'd sewn herself, a blending of Apache traditional patterns and frontier practicality. Samuel wore a suit that had belonged to his father, passed down through decades. When they exchanged vows, they did so as equals, two people who'd each learned what it meant to survive alone and who'd chosen to build something together. 10 years later, the ranch had become something unexpected, a sanctuary for Apache women. Yiska had established a school where Apache girls learned not just survival skills, but intellectual traditions, history, mathematics, literature. She created a place where heritage was celebrated rather than condemned, where women were taught that they had value beyond their usefulness to men. Samuel had become known throughout the territory as a man who supported his wife's vision completely, who understood that her achievement wasn't secondary to his, but equal and essential. They had no biological children, but they had raised dozens of young women who'd come to them broken by circumstance and had left understanding that they had agency, had capability, had futures worth fighting for. On the anniversary of the day Yiska had arrived at Samuel's ranch with her desperate ultimatum, she reflected on what had changed. "I came here asking you to kill me or marry me," she said. "I thought those were the only choices I had. But you offered me something I'd never considered, the choice to become myself first. You gave me time, space, and respect. You believed in me before I believed in myself. You did the real work," Samuel said. "I just got out of your way and let you become who you were always capable of being." "No," Yiska said firmly. "You did something far more important. You treated me like I was worth the effort. You saw me as a person, not a problem to solve. You gave me something that no one else had ever given me, genuine dignity." The Apache widow who'd come asking to be killed or married had instead become a leader, a teacher, a visionary. She'd built a legacy that extended far beyond one ranch, far beyond one relationship. She created a system where Apache girls understood that they didn't have to choose between survival and humanity, that they could have both safety and agency, that they deserved to be valued for their minds and their spirits. Samuel had given her shelter, yes, but what he'd really given her was time. Time to heal, time to remember, time to become herself again. In that gift of time, Yiska had discovered that she'd never actually needed to choose between death and marriage. She'd only needed someone brave enough to offer her a third choice, the opportunity to live on her own terms. And that, she understood, was the greatest act of love anyone could offer. Not possession masquerading as protection, but respect masquerading as partnership. Real support, real equality, real love. The woman who'd come to the ranch desperate and broken had become the woman who taught hundreds of other women that they deserved the same thing, a life worth living, chosen freely, built on respect and genuine partnership. And Samuel, the lonely rancher who'd spent 35 years alone, discovered that sometimes the greatest companionship comes from standing beside someone while they save themselves, and believing in their strength even when they haven't yet learned to believe in it themselves.